Okay, thank you so very much, Penny. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you today on two practice standards, the 329 standard and the 345 standard. That is the residue and tillage management for no-till, and no-till is also strip-till, those two. And then the other one is what we used to in the olden days referred to as reduced till and spring moldboard plow. So we have two standards now, and they encompass all of those factors where we used to have four many, many years ago. But overall, the changes to these standards are not very huge, but we did add a little bit into them. So I'm going to go down through them pretty specifically, and then I'm also going to share some tools with you so that you have a better understanding of some of the concepts behind these tillage standards. So I think you'll find that helpful. So I want to start out we're going to dive right into the no-till practice standard, and that is 329. And as I stated a minute ago, this also incorporates the strip till, we call it zone till, same difference, where we just have a very small surface area disturbance. So we'll talk more about how you can define what's what out there, but for now I'm just going to focus on the practice standard itself. So the definition is obviously just it's a limitation of the soil disturbance. It in the management, the amount, the orientation, and the distribution of those crop plant residues on the soil surface. That's it in a nutshell what the 329 standard is about. The purpose for 329 has expanded a little bit recently, but overall it's always about reducing sheet rill erosion as well as wind erosion and dealing with excessive sedimentation into the surface waters of Wisconsin. So reduced tillage also looks at particulate emissions, in other words, dust emissions. It maintains an increased soil health and organic matter content. So we've definitely built soil health into this practice standard, which is great. Energy reduction is part of this practice standard. Increasing plant available moisture is absolutely a part of this practice standard. And food and escape cover for wildlife is also a part of the 329 standard. So I'm just going to talk to you. This is basically all about cropland. And what we need to make sure we're understanding is that we do not burn any residue. All residues are supposed to be uniformly distributed over the entire field. So what that's telling you is that you need a combine spreader that's doing an adequate job so that you have residues uniformly across the entire area. You're not to be removing residue from, except for the row area where you're planting into. It's okay to have trash whippers moving that residue out of the way, but overall this is not a practice standard where you're going to get to remove residue. This practice involves only in-row disturbances, so there can be no full width tillage being performed from either harvest or from any kind of tillage operation. So what that's really defining, the definition of that is that no more than 30% of the entire soil surface can be disturbed by either planting or nutrient placement, in other words, manure application or fertilizer applications, in order to meet this practice standard. That's really, really important because you will hear a lot of producers tell you, I am a no-till operator, but I like to scratch the surface. Maybe that's a roller, maybe that's other tillage equipment, but if they're doing full surface, any disturbance, it doesn't fit into this practice standard. So that's a really important concept to grasp. The stir value is a really important factor because what that's measuring is that true disturbance to that soil layer. And it's measuring the field operations that total the stir value or that soil tillage intensity rating. So we need to pay close attention to exactly what they're doing, exactly what equipment they're using, so that we know indeed that that stir value, that Russell 2 or SNAP Plus, which is Russell 2, spit out at us, is truly 20 or below. Because if it's over that, we're not dealing with no-till, we are then dealing with residue management practice standards. So you can inject manure, and I think that's something a lot of people don't realize, as long as it's low disturbance injectors. So if you're able to maintain that true steer value at no greater than 20, it still fits into the 329 no-till practice standard. So I'll be sharing a picture and talk to you briefly about that in a little bit too. Basically, we have some additional criteria that's focused on some of these resource concerns. So if sediment to surface water and particulates and reducing erosion is part of our main focus, we want to make sure that we're really paying attention to that residue level. It's distributed uniformly across the surface. We want to pay attention to the time of year that residue is there, so we have protection in the spring from that residue from the snow melt. We also want to make sure that our soil disturbances have all been captured and that we know exactly what's going on out there as far as that surface protection. Additional criteria, we've got soil health and organic matter. I'll talk quite a bit about the SCI, the Soil Conditioning Index. We used to say it could be at 0 and above and meet, but now 0 just simply means you're maintaining. So you're not building anything in a positive direction, you're just status quo. So the standard now indicates you do have to have a positive, SCI, Soil Conditioning Index. And that just basically is telling you that you are not depleting your carbon levels, you're not depleting your organic matter. So we're looking for a positive SCI for this practice standard. In addition to that, we have put back in now, it's going to reference residue levels. So here we have 60% minimum residue cover on the soil surface, and that's throughout the entire year. In other words, a ton of residue needs to be maintained. There were several years where we didn't even reference our percent residue. I think it's good to see that that's back into the picture here. So oftentimes in the past we used to say 90% if it's no-till. Well, now it's 60% minimum. But that again is over the entire surface of that crop field. So pay attention to those residue levels because you need at least that amount every day, all year, throughout each of the rotations. So that's a little tough when it comes to soybean stubble, but you can do it especially if you're rotating. You've got some corn stubble out there to start with as well. So after that, they're looking for a stubble height, so you have some ability. If you're looking at plant available water as your purpose, you're going to want to leave that crop stubble. So you're not going to want to chop those stalks. You're going to want to keep those stalks, the stubble height up to 10 to 15 inches in order to trap the snow in that field. That's usually not such a big deal for Wisconsin, but it can be depending on your purpose and your soils. All right. Then we also have reduced energy as a purpose for this practice standard. So if your total energy consumption, and that's something that Russell 2 will spit out at you, if it is at least a 25% reduction in energy use, then you meet the purpose for that particular criteria if that was your purpose that you were targeting. We want to drop your energy consumption down 25%, and that's usually factored in reducing those tillages across the field, so you're saving on your energy use or your fuel use. And then of course we have food and cover for wildlife, so we're wanting to see stubble height, and so we have some cover out there and some food source for wildlife species. Those are all the different purposes for this particular practice standard. So under general considerations, we're looking at, we're trying to do something with soil quality, with porosity, with soil health. So that's a major consideration for this practice standard. One thing too is just always good to understand that in order to get the full value of a no-till practice standard, it takes 6 years of continuous no-till in order to really reap the benefits of this particular practice standard, and that's something a lot of people don't understand. Each soil has a different year. Some soils respond appropriately in less than 6 years, but overall, on an average for Wisconsin, it takes 6 years consecutively for us to really see the impact that no-till has. A lot of people get discouraged at the beginning because there are certain things that they have to understand about agronomy. They've got to really know that their pH is adequate. They've got to know how to distribute that fertilizer, and there's just some tricks to the trade. They've got to make sure their equipment is set up. But if we don't do continuous 6 years in a row of no tillage, we're never going to really achieve what it is that we're trying to do from a soil health standpoint. So I always point that out. That's really a critical element. So those folks that have been into no-till for a long time really are seeing the value. Their infiltration rates are increasing, their bioactivity, all kinds of reasons no-till is really successful. But again, it takes time for this practice to really establish itself. On a personal note, I have had over 30 years of continuous no-till on the farm that I own and I manage, and I will tell you, it's pretty amazing year after year the impact of continuing this practice standard has. So can't say it enough, if you're just doing it every other rotation, you're just not getting there. But of course, anything's better than nothing. So we keep trying to grow folks towards no tillage, but we just need to accept that there is a difference between 6, 7, 8, 10 year of no-till and somebody doing it every other rotation. So no-till can reduce potential for compaction. It says can because everything's about when you're out there and what you're doing. You can mess up no-till just like you can any other crop. So we need to be very careful about the soil structure. It definitely can change your infiltration rates, but again, you've got to be able to manage your fields. You can't be out there when the conditions aren't right to be out there. On the other side of the coin, it generally allows you better conditions because your infiltration rate is better, your organic matter is higher, so you can get on those fields generally sooner. But we need to pay attention to our management and not do bad things if we want to do a good job with no-till. Removing crop residue by baling or intensively grazing will obviously have a negative impact. Production of adequate crop residues. We need to pay attention to high residue producing crops. In other words, that is going to always be important to giving us our bottom line with that residue level. Use of cover crops is phenomenal with the no-till system, and we have a lot of people very interested in double cropping, and by definition double cropping is where you're running, it may be a cover crop, but you're running it at the same time as the crop that's growing there. So it's using dual purpose, 2 crops instead of 1. So those are all very positive potentially for no-till. Increased plant populations is also something that oftentimes is beneficial with the no-till system. Use of no-till for all crops in the rotation. Some of the things that we should pay attention to that are beneficial is to increase the rate. It will increase the rate of soil organic matter accumulation. And that's one of the most positive reasons to really push somebody towards no tillage. Keeping soil in the consolidated condition, which means all indicators, all the soil health qualities are maximizing. More carbon in the soil, more organic matter, less being depleted, reduce the amount of particulate matter that the field generates, which is very beneficial in the spring of the year especially, and obviously saving energy as a benefit, and increasing root channels and other infiltrations in a positive manner is also another reason for this practice standard. So some of the other things I just want to point out and that is soil organic matter content and improving soil health. There's a whole section here on why this practice standard surfaces quickly when we're talking about growing soil health. So some of the highlights here, it's especially important if we have been doing any deep soil disturbances, subsoiling and fertilizer injection, we do need to make sure that our vertical slot is closing at the surface. So we don't want to accidentally impair the field if you are doing subsoiling, which is okay as long as you haven't gone beyond your surface disturbance with that practice. But if we don't close that slot at the surface, it can definitely have a negative impact on the success of a no-till operation, and that just goes without saying and makes sense. Obviously, minimizing soil disturbances means that we will release less carbon dioxide, and that means we will oxidize less organic matter. We also look at soil temperature. Oxidation occurs above 50 degrees, so if we are doing any disturbances that we can with soil below 50 degrees, it's more beneficial to us as far as that organic matter level. Crop residue and especially living cover, that's really important for us to understand the impact of. So anytime if you are working with no-till operators, they will always have a positive attitude towards extreme conditions. Dry periods and droughts are very beneficial to the no-till operations because they just keep more of that moisture available to those plants, and that has a lot to do with that soil organic matter, that infiltration, and just holding that water in place rather than seeing it run off. Diverse crop rotations are important. Obviously, all of our practice standards have a direct relationship on each other, so just like everything else, the no-till standard, you really have to be doing a good job with nutrient management and keeping things in place as far as nutrient needs, and then pH levels. That's going to be highly beneficial. Crop rotation is highly beneficial to breaking cycles, and cover crops highly beneficial to dealing with making sure that we have protected that soil and maybe suppressing weeds and other things. So there's all kinds of reasons why you look at other practice standards to supplement this one and enhance this one. Okay, then we have some considerations. I'm not going to read all of these, but if anybody has any questions as we go down through it, plant available moisture is a big consideration. So if you are concerned about going into a dry season, you're anticipating it, or you have soils that tend to be erodibility index for wind erosion is a concern for them, plant available moisture is important. Then we have some considerations on how we can enhance wildlife. And then we go to the plans and specs, and with every practice standard, that's the bottom line in what it is that we need to document in order to say that this practice standard was truly applied. So in the plans and specs, we have what is the crop, where is this crop, which fields. We're looking at residue cover, residue orientation, and overall, what's the disturbance of that soil surface. Then we're looking at residue levels again now, because we said we need 60% residue. We look at the STIR value that's critical. We document the soil conditioning index. We look at that erosion rate, and we look at any other specific purpose that we're trying to document. If it's wildlife, then we're looking for that standing residue. If it's fuel consumption, we're looking at savings by not doing an extra pass or two across the field. Then we look at the operation and maintenance of this practice standard. Basically, some of the things that we have to pay attention to is don't be on there when it's not the right condition to be out there. Because if we aren't careful, we're going to have level ruts. We're going to have to level ruts out because we're going to get conditions where that can be a problem. Here it's interesting because it says no more than 10% of the field can be tilled if we want to call it no-till or reduced or no-till practice standard. This becomes important because I've worked with a lot of farmers over the year that tell me they're no-till operators, and they're big operators and they use heavy equipment and they move their trucks in and around, and before you know it, they're out there with a disking, leveling ruts out, and if it's more than 10% of that field where they're disking to just level off the ruts, you really can't call that no tillage anymore because they're disturbing more than 10% of the entire field because maybe they're running around a third of the edge, a third of the field, they're running the disc across just to level things out. That's just telling them that they need to be a little more careful on timing and conditions of when they're out there if they're truly no-tilling. So enough said about that, but it's nice to see that that was actually defined in the standard. So that's it for that practice standard. And I'm going to jump right into the next practice standard, and that one is reduced tillage. All right, and I'm not going to read this whole one to you, but I'm just going to tell you a few highlights here. This one, we used to call it the spring plow. We used to call it the reduced till. Well, what it is an accumulation of anything that doesn't meet the no-till standard. So obviously there's some differences. In this one, the definition itself is different. So they're looking at the amount, the orientation, the distribution of that crop residue again on the surface. And we are restricting soil disturbance activities during that growing season, but it's different as far as what we're able to do with that tillage operation. So the purposes are the same, although it's reduced a little bit. We've got sheet and rill and wind erosion, excessive sedimentation into surface water. Those are primary. Particulates we can impact by reducing some tillage. Soil health will increase if we reduce some passes on this land, and reducing energy is going to help. So I do want to say that not everything, I mean, no-till is obviously the ideal. It's an ideal world, but people do have the choice that, I mean, they're the farmer and they can make these decisions. Reduced tilling has some incredible benefits as well. So sometimes, even though they're reducing tillage, that's certainly better than what they were doing, so we just keep walking them in the right direction. So I just want to mention that about the standard. So the purposes of this standard, again, we are looking at stir values. We're also looking at other things, but this practice basically is telling you if we don't meet the no-till standard, everything else fits in here as long as it meets the standard for 345. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. The standard itself, the criteria says you cannot burn residue. Wisconsin doesn't do a lot of that, but there are pockets where they do burn residue. It's an older practice that we did used to use a lot more often, but obviously we cannot be burning residue. We're still assuming a uniform distribution of that residue over the entire area. And we're looking at stir values. And we're looking at the stir value rated of no more than 80. That's pretty high, but what this is telling you is that it's pulling in a lot of different options, but anything beyond 80 is certainly not going to fall under this reduced till standard. So you got quite an area. You can go from a stir rating of 20 all the way up to 80 and still meet the merits of this practice standard. So some of the other things that we need to pay attention to in this standard, it also needs to have a soil conditioning index above 0. We'll talk about that in a minute, but that's going to be probably your limiting factor before you can even get to that 80 of a stir value. That SCI is going to catch you. So we got to pay attention to that. Dominant critical soil unit we're looking at when we're doing this, when we're defining this practice standard. So time of year that the residue is needed has to be there in the spring of the year. We're going to be looking at some other criteria. Particulate emissions, and here's where it talks about the soil conditioning index has got to be greater than 0, so that could be a limiting factor for you, even before you get all the way up to that 80 stir value. Again, the energy reduction, if you hit a 25% reduction in that benchmark condition, we're okay with energy. And then, this is fairly common sense here. We went through the last one, and general considerations. Baling and grazing can be a negative impact. We know that. Reduced till continuously throughout the crop sequence is potentially going to be a less valuable decision. And these are just some of the things that we just want to do the best we can to see how we can reduce that tillage. So organic matter content and soil health. I like this section because it really does talk about the values that we are trying to instill in regards to soil health. Again, they're looking at if you go in there and do your soil disturbances below 50 degrees, you're going to have less negative impact on that carbon dioxide. In other words, warmer soils break down that organic matter quicker. So fall tillage is better, or spring tillage before that ground gets a chance to get up there in temperature. And some of the other things here go without saying. We've kind of gone over quite a few of them, but I just want to quickly go through this. We've got wildlife considerations, and then again our plans and specs tell us how to document this practice standard. So we went really fast on this practice standard, but I think they're all pretty straightforward, pretty easy to understand. And what I want to spend some time today is I really want to spend a little bit more time looking at some of the tools that we have that I want you to get used to using that kind of help you understand some of the concepts. So this is the first one. This one was developed by a number of people back in about 2006, and I think we need to keep bringing this one forward because it helps us to understand what is meant by that soil disturbance. It helps us to understand the equipment a little bit, so I just want to go down through this. I'm going to keep this one split out the way we used to talk because I think it's very helpful to us when we're talking with our clients to really let them know what is no-till versus what is strip-till versus what is, and we just keep going down, a double pass strip, and then what does reduced tillage really look like? We have variables when we go all the way up to 80 on a stir value and all the way down, in this case no-till, to 10. I think there's really big differences in the middle of these standards that need to be understood so that we can help keep selling people toward what true no-till is. So I'm not going to make this, I'm not going to combine these. I want to keep them pure because I think this really tells us a lot. So the first thing I'm going to focus on is the first line, and this is in the 329 practice standard. What is true, pure no-till? If you're really paying attention to true no-till, your stir value can never be above a 10. So that means you have a no-till planter. You're doing absolute minimum disturbances. So there's not much going on out there other than you're absolutely using a no-till planter. You may knife in some nitrogen, but if you do, you're using really narrow going blank here. Your knives are not going to disturb much of that soil. So on the right-hand side here, this is what your field should look like after planting or after any disturbance. It should be minor. You should have that total surface of 85% not disturbed. In other words, of that total surface, only 15% of it got disturbed. So that's a true no-till system. Those are kind of hard to get to, but that's your ideal circumstance. Then if we go to strip till, you're allowed to do just a little bit more. So the definition of a strip till is that in that zone of planting, in that strip, you will disturb a little bit, but you're going to keep it to 70% of the whole surface not disturbed, and only 30% of the overall field surface is disturbed. So I think this is really important for us to understand, because we can start to see if farmers, even if they modify equipment, we can start to figure out, are you in or are you out of the 329 standard? And we can start to talk intelligently to them about that. There are a lot of pieces of equipment that actually say no-till on them, but they are full surface disturbances. While they don't disturb much, it might only be a ½ inch down. By definition, if you're disturbing 100% of that field, you're running across it with spikes or rollers or anything that's causing a disturbance 100%, then you're not in the 329 standard anymore. So we want to understand that basic difference there. Okay, so that's 329. Then we go to 345, which is either mulch or reduced tillage. You get a lot more latitude to play out there. So you're looking at a stir value of 80. And I'm going to get on a soapbox for a second here and just say the stir value really means something. And it really is telling you what you're doing to that soil profile. Just how much are you disturbing that soil profile? But if we don't ask the right questions and we don't pull up enough information, we're never going to capture all their tillage, and that's when we're going to get in trouble, because our stir values are going to be low, but yet they are disturbing. So we've got to make sure the stir value means something. So when you're talking to producers, you got to know everything they're doing with their manure, because they won't remember to tell you. Because when you're asking them about tillage, they're thinking, before I plant, what do I do? They may not be thinking about if they do some old-fashioned things like cultivate. They probably won't be thinking about that, because their frame of mind is all about preparing that seed bed. So we got to ask all the right questions to capture all of the tillage that's going to happen from planting to planting. And if we don't do that, our numbers are not going to be adequate. And I kind of harp on this a lot, but I really do believe when I see a lot of rilling going on in a field and we haven't had a major rain event, then I'm really asking myself, guys, have you caught all the tillage out here? Because something's not working with this Russell run. So I'm going to say it again on this practice standard. That is so critical that we capture everything. So there are a couple of tools that I want to tell you exist in order to capture that. But let me finish this worksheet. We've got some sample equipment, and I will get into that tool that I want you to use. There's information here on the no-till and the zone till, and some of the advantages and some of the things that you need to pay attention to, the mulch till, and then we have some manure applications. And again, I don't want to discourage manure application, but we can do low impact manure applications on a no-till system and be just fine. The same with anhydrous injectors. There are aggressive injectors, and then there are some that have very, very narrow and very low impact to that overall surface. So all of that matters, and we've got to ask the question so we know what equipment they're using. Otherwise, the stir value means nothing. So I just wanted to mention this. This particular tool is housed on the website, and I apologize, it's going to find its way over to Section 3 as a tool. Just haven't gotten it there yet. But it is on the website under Conservation Planning, Wisconsin's website, Conservation Planning, and then in the agronomy section. So you should be able to find that there fairly easily. And then the other tool, before I go back to a couple other things on the website, is this one. This is old as the hills, but I have to say I really like this one. I found that the link is broken this morning, so I need to repair that link. But if you can't find it in Wisconsin, I always run off to Iowa and steal it from them, because Iowa, Barb down there, the state agronomist, is the one that really was instrumental in getting this document put together. So Wisconsin's link will be fixed here shortly, but I just haven't caught up to it. I noticed it this morning. So this is the old pocket guide. It's a really handy tool. You should find them laying around in the offices, because we gave these out a lot, both LCD and NRCS staff over the years. But this is basically telling you, how do I match up my equipment and know what I'm doing out there? And how do I use this tool to build into Russell 2? What is this equipment all about? This again kind of links right back to the tool we just looked at, where it talks about row width disturbances. It talks about what's going on with how this particular implement works. So this will help you if you have not studied this. This is really kind of essential to understanding how to run Russell. So you got to know the different types of sweeps because they have a major difference in how they invert soil, how they disturb, whether it's the entire width, whether it's just how much inversion is happening and what fits with what. So I'm just going to lead you here and tell you, really pay attention to this little handy tool that will help you guide which equipment they're using, and you may find that there's equipment that no one has seen before because farmers are very ingenious at getting new equipment pulled together. So you may have to do a little research yourself to figure out what's going on out here. So again, here's an example of a rolling basket. Somebody will tell you, I'm 100% no-till, and I just use this to knock my residue down. They like to use this because if you build your residue, you break your residue down into the soil, it'll break up over winter better. Not over winter, but it'll incorporate better with the soil bacteria, break down quicker. But just remember, this just throws them out of the 329 and puts them right into the 345 standard because it's 100% disturbance. Even though they may not see it that way, it is disturbing that soil surface. So you can learn a lot by looking through this little gem of a book, and make sure you do. Again, if you don't have the hard copy book itself, it's just this little tiny pocket guide that you can flip open. Go online. You can get this online. It's on the website, and it will be on Wisconsin's website as soon as I can get it there. So I guess that's about all I wanted to say. This is kind of nice too because it has some cheat sheets for Russell 2 so that you can start to understand what some of those abbreviations are, because those are really critical, and understand a little bit more about the R2, or I'm always talking Russell 2, but SNAP Plus uses the same conventions. So we need to be aware of these tools and be using them. Okay, I want to take you on a journey through the Field Office Tech Guide because I want to make sure that you get your hands on the tool for capturing all the tillage. I should have pulled it up. Uh-oh, now I'm in trouble. I should have pulled it up, but I didn't, and now I'm going to try and get it. I got to get to the Field Office Tech Guide, and I hope I don't have too much stuff open that I can't do this, but it's worth it for me to just get you there. I might just have to explain it to you if this thing is not functioning, but now it's looking good. Section 3 of the Field Office Tech Guide is where we find all of the tools that we have made available to you and all of the things you need to know about planning. So I'm going to go right into the planning tools, and obviously we're in the agronomy world right now, and here is the tillage and rotation worksheet. And I really want to see you start using this if you have not already. So this is where we capture our rotation. Whoops, I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong screen, so you can't see this. But here, let me pull it across. All right. So here it is, and you didn't see where I got this from, so I'll back up a minute here and go through it again. But while it's up, I want to tell you that this is what the worksheet looks like. It was recently updated because we put together a cover crop section. For years, we were so proud of ourselves, we kept this down to a one-pager. Well, sorry, gosh, it went into 2. But here's what you need to know. It captures clearly all of our tillage operations, and this is our rotation where it's first year, second year, third year, fourth year, fifth year, up to 7 years. Very unusual to get an 8-year rotation. In fact, we stop at that point and say it's not a rotation if it goes beyond 8. I like to say if it goes beyond 6, it's probably not a realistic rotation, but there are those farmers that can do that. So we're going to look at each year in that rotation, and we're going to capture all of these disturbances. So we're going to look at the primary tillage, the secondary tillage, what other tillage could be going on. Are you taking your residue off? To what degree are you taking it? What about manure? How's that getting on there? Are you cultivating? Are you doing any fertilizer incorporation? And what kind of residue do you have estimated after planting? These are all critical pieces to running the right Russells in order to know what the true stir is and what the true soil conditioning index is. So I want to make sure we're paying attention to this. I think too there's some additions to this one, approximate years of acres of a crop in any given year. We're looking for, I have a 200-acre farm, for example. How many acres of grain do I put out there? This just helps you keep sure that this farmer is telling you the truth. So if they tell you that they have corn silage and they only have a little bit of corn silage, but yet down here they tell you they have 50 acres out of the 200, then you know roughly, is that rotation realistic and what does it match up above? So those are just some helpful hints on that page. The back is where you can capture all the right stuff to know exactly what you're dealing with, excuse me, in regard to tillage. So I just wanted to alert you to this. Now I'm going to back you up and tell you again where to find this. Section 3, Field Office Tech Guide, and it's a planning tool, agronomy, and there it sits. So please make sure you're using that, or if you have a better version of it, please share it with me because I'll adopt it if it's better. And then I just want to, let's see what time we're doing here. Got about 1 minute. I want to share with you just a little bit of a PowerPoint because I think we have some things here that are kind of important and this won't take very long. But crop canopy and crop residue are really critical, extremely critical as to what's going on with the benefits of soil health and just how things are being addressed out there. Some of the things that we really want to pay attention to is over time with no tillage, our soil quality goes up. And I told you it takes 6 years. Every single year there's a major increase in the value of no-till. So this one is demonstrating that. The aggregates, the infiltration rates go up. So the nutrient holding, water and nutrient holding capacities increase. Productivity increases. But it doesn't do that the first year. In fact, it can go down. So I just want to keep emphasizing the importance of really understanding that this practice standard for no tillage is tricky. And we oftentimes sell it, but we don't sometimes understand what they need to know in order to be successful with it. So I just want to keep emphasizing that. We need to do our homework and really understand the practice standard and all the pieces and parts that come together to make this a really fantastic soil health practice. Residue and tillage management is what we talked about today. And then we have reduced tillage. So anything above a 20 stir value is reduced tillage. Anything below is 393, which is no-till. So it's the purposes we talked about, but these are the purposes again for the standard. I can't say enough good things about no-till, but at the same time, I'm also extremely careful that I don't oversell it to somebody whose management is not at the level that it needs to be successful with no tillage. So I just want to keep emphasizing that. I also want to mention we don't scratch the surface and call it no-till. We don't disc 30% of the field and call it no-till. So we've kind of defined what we need there. Really pay attention to stir and the soil conditioning index. And again, if it's 6 years of no-till, we made it. Now we're really starting to see some benefits. And don't be afraid to incorporate manure. Fantastic practice. It goes right along with no-till. Just watch the conditions when you're out there on that land. So yes, there is no low disturbance manure applications are perfectly acceptable. And then we have the 345, and these are some of the general differences between the two. We're looking at a stir value that can go from 20 all the way up to 80. Hopefully it's not anywhere near the 80, but if it is under 80, we're good to go. But we need a soil conditioning index of above 0, which means our carbon rates, our organic matter breakdown is not at a negative. So that, in a nutshell, is what we're doing with those two practice standards. So at this point, ran a couple minutes over, but we like to keep the last 15 minutes open for questions. So enough out of me. Now it's your turn.
Judy, this is Penny. And there was one in the chat line that, I don't know if you can see that, but it says, can too much organic residue lead to problems with slugs or other field crop pests? If so, are there good ways to eradicate slugs other than tilling the soil?
Oh, somebody's having some slug problems. What I'm going to say about that is I'm never going to blame the organic matter levels for the slug problem. And in all honesty, slugs are basically the condition of the weather patterns for that year. So we have had some serious slug infiltrations that have literally taken out some of the cover crops. If you pay attention to climate, weather conditions, I'm not saying we have climate changes, I'm saying there are years where you just have wetter conditions and more dampness. Those are the years you can pretty much bank on some slug issues. So what I'm going to say is, obviously, the more residue you have, the more likely that slugs will be an issue. Is that reason not to have residue? Absolutely not. What it's telling you is the conditions are such that you got a problem with that particular pest. So I like to keep people really in tune to looking for them and then dealing with it through their crop scouts and their specialists as far as what do I do? Am I at a threshold where I got to deal with it? But I don't like blaming it on the residue because I think that's very inappropriate. It's the residue in combination with cool, wet conditions. So great question, though, because we do have that issue. And we had it, was it last year or the year before? So again, another reason, keep the rotation moving around. Slugs sometimes are the result of things building up because your rotations don't vary enough. So there's other practice standards that we might want to consider. But that's a good question. So thank you for that.
So you can ask questions to Judy either by unmuting yourself or sending a question through the chat line, or we'll take questions either way. And just a FYI, the soil is blowing in the wind here in Portage County today.
Yeah.
There was a comment made.
Well, I'll tell you what, it's blowing in the wind in a lot of spots in the state. And I spent a lot of time in my career where I would get really a lot of phone calls this time of year. Residue is needed to protect that surface. These practice standards have a real merit there, but so does irrigation, a few other things that we need to keep in unison. So, all right. Any other questions? It's your opportunity. I went very, very rapidly, and I get that, and I left you with a lot of research that you might want to consider doing, but I really have, I think these are really important practice standards, so.
Well, I just wanted to mention before everyone leaves us quickly that I did send a link out in the chat line for a survey or an evaluation of today's training. If you could fill that out, that would be greatly appreciated. And this webinar is being recorded, so once it is recorded and done all the good things to it. We'll post it on the Wisconsin Land and Water Media website, so you can access it at any time. And I just wanted to mention too that this webinar is being provided through the Standards Oversight Council, which Judy's a member of. That's also called SOC, and also the State Interagency Training Agency, SITCOM. So you may want to be aware that those are being offered. Hopefully you aren't getting all the background noise in our office here.
And thank you so much, Penny, for everything you do to help get the message out on any of the practice standards. Can't say enough about the importance of that training.
Right. And people I know, you can listen to these webinars anytime. We do have another question. Are the studies in the north still leading towards showing that no-till does not affect the ability for seeds to germinate due to damp and cold conditions?
Okay, what I will tell you about no-till is when you have damp and cold conditions, if you have somebody that's been doing a lot of no-till over the years, they don't, you know, it's not an issue. There's a lot of people that feel very strongly that what no-till does is it keeps the soil from warming up. But if you really look at the science behind it, what you will discover is that all the microbiology is quicker on a no-till system than when you disturb that soil. And so there's a lot of thought about cold, wet because it's not tilled. Reality is there is no science. The science is showing us that that soil can and will warm up quicker if it's in good condition. So I'm saying that to say this can be an issue in that first year or two of no-till because the soil hasn't had that chance to consolidate like all conditions come together from that lack of disturbance. So as they grow in no-till, this becomes less and less of an issue. In fact, it becomes better because soil that the infiltration is getting down instead of sitting on the surface of that soil. So there's just a lot of benefits for being patient in building no tillage. There's still a lot of myths out there about how I can't warm my soil up if I don't till it. And science is not supportive of that theory. So what I would say to you is research a little bit and be able to share more knowledge with producers. You don't want to argue with them, but you do want to bring that knowledge base in and look at some of the soil health studies that have gone on to get you some armor to debate with them, not debate, but to talk intelligently with them. Hopefully that answers your question on that one. Germination, just one heads up thing. Of all the things that can go wrong with no tillage, it's equipment failure that can cause a huge issue. So sometimes a lack of germinating, sometimes the seeds are germinating, but what's happening is they may not be, equipment may not be set up well enough to close that slit or to close that, the wheels may not be closing that seeding furrow, and that will cause failure in a heartbeat too. So there's a lot of things that people need to be very careful of when converting to no-till that they need to be looking at, because otherwise the cold condition gets blamed and it might be equipment failure. So I'm just saying you really got to do some research when it comes to no tillage. There's a lot of things that we need to know so that we can help people be successful with it.